Okay, this is Business 342, page 81, problem number 11. You would like to create a portfolio that is equally invested in a risk-free asset and two stocks. So if it's equally invested, that's going to be 1/3 in this and 1/3 in each one of these two stocks, right? So that's your weighting right there. That tells you. One stock has a beta of 1.14. What does the beta of the second stock have to be if you want the portfolio to be equally as risky as the overall market? We talked about on number 10, and I'll reiterate on this, the beta of the overall market is 1. And that's what everything is basically judged by. If you have a beta of 0.5, remember beta represents risk relative to the market. So the overall market has a risk of 1. If your beta is 0.5, you have half the risk of the overall market. If your beta is 2, you have twice the risk of the overall market. Okay, but the overall market beta is 1. So in this case, you know that you want your portfolio to equal 1. And so these three assets are going to have to average 1 for their risk. You know, they're betas. When you add them together, remember, when you figure out a portfolio's beta, BP, beta of the portfolio, it's a weighted average of the different assets. The weight of asset 1 times the beta of asset 1 times the weight of asset plus the weight of asset 2 times the beta of asset 2 plus the weight of asset 3 times the beta of asset 3, and so on and so forth, depending on how many assets you have. So it's just the weighted average. So if you've got 3 assets and you want them to average 1, which is the market, their betas with the weighted average have to add up to 3, and you divide it by 3, and that gets you 1, right? Okay. What does the beta of the second stock have to be if you want the portfolio to be equally as risky as the overall market? So you know you've got one beta of 1.14, and you've got a risk-free asset. A risk-free asset has a 0 beta. Remember, beta represents risk, so just as standard deviation does too. Beta represents risk. This is a risk-free asset. So risk-free assets do not have any risk, so their beta is 0. Okay? Just like their standard deviation is 0, because standard deviation is a deviation away from the mu, and so since there is no risk, their standard deviation is 0. And it also means that their correlation to risky assets, correlation is one of the things that you deal with in this chapter, the correlation to risky assets is 0. So their beta is 0, their standard deviation is 0, and their correlation is 0 to other risky assets. So you know that one of these has a beta 1.14 and one of them has a beta 0, so that's 2 of them already. You know that these 3 numbers have to add up to 3 because it's a weighted average. If you need these to add up to 3 so they can divide by 3, which would equal 1 for an average beta, because portfolio beta is a weighted average. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. In this case, since you know that's equally weighted, you know they have to average to 1, you know this has to average to 3. You've already got 1.14. You got it takes 1.86 plus 1.14 plus 0, because the risk-free asset is 0, to equal 3. So you can just take 3 minus the 1.14 minus the 0 and get 1.86, and that tells you how to do it too. The other way to do it is because it won't be that easy most of the times, is to do it like you're doing a weighted average, right? You know your average, you want to be 1 at the end. So you take the weight of each one of them. They told you it's equally a third, a third, a third. So 0.3333 times the beta of 1.14, 0.3333 times the beta of x, because that's for the other stock that you don't know what it is, and plus 0.3333 times the beta 0, and that's the risk-free fund. Okay, so 1 equals, and you multiply these, you get 0.38 plus 0.33x plus 0. Okay, so you move this to the other side, this becomes 0.62. This is just simple basic algebra. Equals 0.3333x. You divide this by 0.333 and you divide that by 0.33 and you get 1.86 equals x. This is the way to probably do it. Remember, put x for the one that you're trying to find. Multiply it times the weight. Don't forget that. This is probably the best way to do it, just so you understand how to do it, because they're not going to do something that easy on a test, I guarantee you. Okay, and the other thing is just that you know this has to equal 3, because it's got to be 1 times 3 because it's 3 assets, and you've got 1.14 and you've got an x and 0. So that's another way of doing it too. But I would do it the weighted average way just because that's probably how it's going to be on your test. Okay, that's problem number 11 on page 81.